Are you exhausted all the time in marathon training, or are you tired of falling short of your goals come race day? Stop making this common marathon training mistake. Today, I'm going to be talking about how too much intensity can hurt your marathon training and what you can do instead to run your fastest race. So it's a common problem. So many runners leave their race in their training and fall short on race day. Over the course of 16 or 20 weeks of training, they go too hard when it doesn't matter, or they train in a way that doesn't prepare them for the specific demands of the marathon. And so it's no wonder they fall off pace at mile 16. I'm going to go into more detail on how you should do intensity in marathon training and how to improve your training for better results. Hi, I'm Laura. I'm an experienced running coach with a master's degree in exercise science, and I've worked with hundreds of runners to BQs, personal breakthroughs, and podium finishes on the marathon. So I'm here today to help you run a faster marathon, and it all begins in training. So first we have to understand the demands of the marathon itself. The marathon is an almost entirely aerobic event. What this means is that your body uses oxidative pathways, aka oxygen, to produce most of the energy needed. Now, metabolic pathways are never 100% shut off, so yes, there is some very minor contribution of phosphocreatine and anaerobic glycolysis. However, over 98% of the contribution for the marathon is aerobic via some fat oxidation and a lot of carbohydrate oxidation from muscle glycogen and blood glucose. This means that your training needs to prepare you for these energetic demands, aerobic demands of the marathon. If the marathon is a primarily aerobic event, that means that your training needs to focus on aerobic development. You aren't racing a fast 800 meter on the track. You're not even racing a fast 5K on the roads. So your training is going to look different for the marathon than it would for these shorter events, both in terms of training volume and the types of workouts you do. Each workout has a time and place. I'm not saying that marathoners should avoid any and all high intensity work, because you still want to improve your running economy and raise your top end speed over time. But both the dose and the timing of those workouts matters. You probably want to work on speed outside of marathon training and then keep a small dose of speed in marathon training so that most of your training intensity supports the energetic demands of the marathon. You want to choose a plan that has mostly easy miles. However, it's not just about selecting a training plan with lots of easy miles. Yes, that matters so much. However, how you actually run those easy days matters a lot too. Many recreational marathoners fall into the trap of running their easy days a tiny bit too moderate. They think it's okay because they aren't going as hard as they go in workouts, but in reality, they aren't going easy enough to reap the full benefits of those easy runs. Easy runs in marathon training are meant to accumulate as much training volume as your body can tolerate, so that you get these aerobic adaptations that come from high volume training, such as mitochondrial development, angiogenesis, etc., without creating excessive fatigue or raising your injury risk. And therein lies the issue. Sure, moderate intensity has some similar aerobic benefits. There are some changes in fat to carb oxidation. And because of that, it is much more fatiguing. So even though you're not working anaerobically, you're still accumulating fatigue. If you do one run at a moderate pace per week, you might not notice that fatigue. But if all your easy runs are run a little bit too fast over weeks and weeks, you will develop more fatigue. Metabolically, you have a higher ratio of glycogen usage on moderate runs, and that impacts your recovery. Biomechanically, there is slightly more tissue strain, which impacts recovery and injury risk. Even your nervous system is more strained on moderate runs compared to easy runs. Now, where this gets interesting is we see in the science, easy running leads to faster marathons. A 2024 study reported that faster marathoners spent more time running truly easy, zones 1 and 2 out of a 5-zone model. Going slower allowed these runners to accrue more training time, which led to a faster finish time. So again, the more easy pace miles they ran, the faster their marathon finishes. And isn't that the pace you want to matter? Marathon day, not just a random easy run. So I tell my marathoners that you cannot go too slow on easy days as long as your biomechanics aren't totally falling apart. For a lot of runners, that's a lot slower than they default to. It's so easy to get wrapped up into thinking that faster is always better, even on easy days, but that's not true. If you like strict numbers, if those give you comfort or a good guideline, many coaches say easy runs should be a minimum of 1 minute per mile slower than marathon pace. Honestly, if you're doing hard workouts and moderate to high volume, easy pace is probably going to be more like 1.5 to 2 minutes per mile slower than marathon pace, or 35 to 70 seconds per kilometer slower. This ensures that you're slowing down enough to balance out the higher training fatigue from the higher training load. And yes, this includes your long runs, unless you have specific workouts built into them. But when you're doing a long run that's just time on your feet, say 16 miles easy, you should be doing them at an easy pace. Yes, long runs should be challenging, but they shouldn't be exhausting. The challenge is from doing the distance, not the pace. Too often, runners push the pace on their long runs to try to prove their fitness. But that's not the purpose of long runs. They're meant to improve your fitness. So slow down, cover the distance, and your body will absorb that training so much better. Now, like I said, there are specific workouts you might do in long runs, and that's a different story. But again, to reiterate, unless you have a specific workout in your long run, do your long runs at least a minute per mile slower than marathon pace, if not more. Finish feeling like you could do a couple more miles. And if you are doing long run workouts, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a moment, they shouldn't be every week. Again, not every long run should be at marathon pace, despite what you might hear on social media. So one common intensity issue beyond not going easy enough on easy days is doing too many high intensity workouts. Whether you're doing too hard of a workout at the expense of a marathon pace workout, or you're doing too much time at intensity within a session for your training load. Either way, your marathon training may suffer. You might be too fatigued for the required volume, your long runs might feel like garbage, which wrecks your confidence going into the race. We don't want that. We want you to feel confident and good in most of your training. So chances are you've heard of polarized training, the idea of hard days hard, easy days easy. Or maybe you've heard of the 80-20 rule, where 80% of runs are easy, 20% are hard. Similar ways of framing the same thing. Now, when we look at the science, which is actually based a lot on what some of the best athletes in the world are doing, we see things a little bit differently. There are multiple ways to define training intensity. So polarized, like I said, is 80% easy and 20% hard. There's actually very little moderate intensity in a polarized model. So you're either doing easy runs or hard interval workouts. You're not doing much tempo work at marathon pace, half marathon pace, that range. Another intensity model we see is called pyramidal. As the name implies, you have about 70 to 80% of your runs easy, this big base, but then about 15 to 19% is moderate, and only a little bit, the top of that triangle, is hard. So it's more moderate running than hard compared to polarized. The pyramidal approach is used very commonly in both elite and sub-elite training plans. In a 2022 review, researchers found that top performing marathoners used the pyramidal approach in the weeks leading up to their race. This was in direct contrast to 1,500 meter runners who used a polarized approach, which makes sense for the demands of their race. Likewise, a 2024 analysis of 92 sub-elite marathon training plans found that pyramidal structure was the most common. Across low, moderate, and high volume plans, 79 to 82% of training was easy, zones 1 or 2, 10 to 18% was moderate, so marathon pace, half marathon, or zone 3, and only about 4 to 8% was at 15K pace or faster, so hard. And this is where the principle of specificity starts to come in. Specificity means that your body adapts to the unique metabolic, biomechanical, and neuromuscular demands imposed by training stimulus. Very broadly, it's like how you run to prepare for running a race. When you train close to marathon pace, so you're doing these marathon pace tempos, etc., you better prepare your body for race day. You'll have better lactate clearance at that pace. Your muscles will resist fatigue better from repeated contractions. You'll be less likely to cramp. You'll understand how pace feels so you don't start out too fast. All these benefits. Workouts like Yasso 800s may be really fun to do, but they actually aren't that specific to the marathon, and they can be pretty fatiguing in a marathon build. So instead of doing these overly fatiguing workouts, try marathon pace, half marathon pace, maybe some small doses of, say, 10K, 15K pace speed mixed into these bigger workouts. A 6 to 8 mile tempo of marathon pace will prepare you so much better than running, say, 10 by 400 meters at the track. When I work with marathoners, we typically do high intensity work early in the build or maybe even right before their marathon build. The further you are from the race, the broader your workouts should be so you don't have any aspect of fitness left behind. But the closer you get to the race, especially 8 to 10 weeks before, the more focused your workouts should be on race pace or supporting paces, marathon pace. So when we do bring in any speed in the final 8 weeks before marathon, it's often mixed into workouts such as cut down intervals, maybe some fartleks before going into a marathon pace tempo, strides, etc. Small, deliberate doses. Now that's one part of avoiding the trap of doing too hard workouts, is choosing the right workouts to support your race goal. The other important part that's a very common mistake runners can make is doing too much time at intensity in these workouts. Whether you are doing intervals early in your build or a marathon pace workout close to your race, you want your workouts to fall within an appropriate session load, and that depends on your training volume, your experience, and your recovery rate. So I just talked about how probably 10 to 18% of your runs will be moderate and less than 8% will be hard in marathon training. And these percentages often refer to minutes or miles of your time at intensity, not just how often you do a session. A high volume runner can do more time at intensity than a low volume runner, assuming all other variables with recovery and training background are equal. So let's take an example. Let's pretend there's two runners. One runs 35 to 40 miles per week, 56 to 64 kilometers. The other runs 55 to 60 miles per week, 89 to 97 kilometers. Let's say you assign an 8-mile marathon pace workout. For the lower volume runner, that's 20% of their training volume in a single workout. But for the 60 mile per week runner, that's 13% of their training volume, which is much more manageable. So even if they look the same on paper, it feels like different workouts to those two runners. Now, this becomes more pronounced the higher intensity goes. So threshold work, etc., and above. For those same two runners, let's just take another popular marathon training workout, albeit an advanced one. 5 by 1 mile at 8K to 10K pace. For a 40 mile per week runner, that's 12% of their week at a hard intensity. Way too much. For a 60 mile per week runner, that's 8%. It's still a pretty gnarly workout, but it is a lot more manageable. And your workouts are only as good as your body's ability to absorb them. Otherwise, you're just adding stress to a bucket and you're not going to adapt. Okay, so we talked about those two mistakes. We're going to move on to a third one. And that is doing too frequent of workouts. So it's another way you can add too much intensity in marathon training. Whether you're doing marathon pace runs, intervals, or something in between, if you do too many hard workouts per week, you skew your weekly intensity too hard in marathon training. The weekly structure of a track workout, tempo run, and long run might work for collegiate runners, but for you, a marathoner who's also not 20 years old, it might lead to burnout, overreaching, or injury. Instead, you want less frequent workouts in marathon training. And I know you're thinking, won't I get slower if I'm going slower on my easy runs and doing these hard workouts less frequently? But you won't. You'll actually absorb your training better. That means you adapt better and run faster. So for high volume, experienced marathoners who recover really well, they can usually get away with 2 hard workouts per week in marathon training. Say 1 marathon pace workout and one slightly faster, maybe at half marathon pace or threshold. Maybe some weeks that marathon pace workout is midweek, maybe some weeks it's in a long run, probably alternating or something. It's a little different for lower volume or less experienced marathoners who might not recover as well from hard workouts. In that case, you should probably stick to one hard workout per week. And this is especially true also if you run only 3 to 4 times per week. If you're a master's athlete, you fall into this category too, since these workouts will take longer to recover from. You want to make sure you can still get in that easy running volume that is going to help you feel your best in the later miles of the marathon. Moderate volume runners are more variable here. So some of them can handle 2 workouts per week. Some can do marathon pace in the long run, maybe every 2 to 3 weeks. Sometimes for moderate volume runners, it helps to think about like a 2-week training schedule where you're doing 3 workouts over 2 weeks, including marathon pace in the long run, versus thinking just strictly within 7 days. So there's lots of ways we can be creative around this. Pay attention to how your body feels. You can sprinkle some strides throughout the week to add in variety and some speed without too much fatigue. Usually once per week is fine for strides, but maybe some runners do them twice a week because strides, again, they're not really a workout. They're more of a speed drill. So these are a few simple takeaways that can hopefully make your marathon training more effective and help you run a faster marathon. Chances are you'll feel better during marathon training too. So just to conclude, keep most of your training easy, go slow on those easy days, do more workouts close to marathon pace or other supporting paces, and don't spend a lot of time doing hard gut-busting track workouts in marathon training. And I want to hear from you in the comments below, so drop a comment. What's your favorite marathon workout? I would love to hear those. And if you have any other questions on marathon training, how to run a faster marathon, please drop that in the comments too. And while you're at it, take the time to like, subscribe, and share this video. Happy running!